I am going to apologize now to the Father and make a comment about the Gospel readings, but the source cannot rise higher, or the stream cannot rise higher than the source. So the Gospel itself talks about plucking out eyeballs. I think I'm safe this evening. Some years ago, I had the great pleasure of traveling to Britain in search of old manuscripts. I visited many libraries in England and Scotland. The most interesting place is a place called Stonyhurst. Stonyhurst is a Catholic college, but in Britain the college is more like Tyburn, what the British use for high school. Among Stonyhurst's graduates were Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, Charles Carroll, one of our founding fathers. Stonyhurst is very old, very hard to find in the middle of the English countryside. The school was built in and around an ancient and dilapidated country estate. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote much of The Lord of the Rings in a cottage nearby the school when he was visiting his son Michael, who was teaching there. One day, after several hours alone, poring over handwritten notes of St. Martin Edelman in the library, the librarian crept in, as librarians do, and asked if I would be interested in seeing some relics. Now, I knew that there were 20 graduates of Stonyhurst who had been martyred in the 16th and 17th centuries. I knew this. So I expected to see the bones of obscure saints. And these things were there, amongst treasures I did not expect. I was shown belongings of St. Thomas More, two rather nice hats that he had left in the Netherlands. I was shown a chaplet or rosary of Mary Queen of Scots, which had a thorn from the crown of thorns in it. I was shown the cord used to bind St. Edmund Campion, one of the greatest English martyrs who was killed in Tyburn, as you probably know. But the most fascinating of all, I was shown Edward Oldcorn's eyeball. Oldcorn was an ordinary Englishman of his day. He was born in 1561 in New York. His father had been a bricklayer and, in fact, was a Protestant. His mother was a Catholic, and she had made considerable sacrifices to keep her faith, including going to jail over it. She made sure that her son was trained in the liberal arts, even if it was only in a small school, little known or little regarded. And she made sure that he was raised with love and a lively knowledge of the Catholic faith. The twin influences of good character formation, especially through his mother's example, classical learning, led Oldcorn to discover God's vocation for him, to travel secretly out of the country, to study for the priesthood at a covert seminary in France, and to come back to his country and to serve the oppressed Catholic population. For about 25 years, Oldcorn kept off the beaten track, dressed as a common man or a beggar, and went from town to town, secretly bringing the Mass and other sacraments to the persecuted Catholics of his homeland. As persecution intensified and the government increasingly tried to root out every sign and practice of Catholicism, some Catholics moved to extremism, what we might today call terrorism. Oldcorn was not in favor of such actions, but he was arrested, framed without any evidence, and after being severely tortured for 5 days, sentenced to death. The one crime he confessed to was that he wasn't a priest. Before his death, Oldcorn restated his innocence with respect to the other charges and his great love for his country. He forgave the man who had betrayed him, who suddenly, just before the execution, asked for Oldcorn's pardon. So hard or wild was the executioner's blow that Oldcorn's eye shot out of the socket. Now, that's all pretty stiff stuff, and probably is not what you were expecting after dinner or before ice cream at your graduation. But I wanted to share it with you because I believe it is a powerful image. The eyeball may not have stuck with Oldcorn, in the land of tea, Thomas the Tank Engine, and cricket, there would be such violence. Violence can appear in least expected. Second, if we peer into the lives of the hundreds of British martyrs, we find that they were rather ordinary folk, but that the final moments of these ordinary folk were built around a common foundation, a simple but deeply rooted Catholic faith that became heroic, and a consistent foundational education in the classics. The vast majority of Tyburn martyrs and the other British saints of this period were all educated in Latin. They had read reams of good literature, classical history, geometry, physics, Greek and Latin philosophy, and catechism. All were taught through the corporal mysteries the crucial command to serve Christ in other people. Most were also at schools that had some sports as well, what the English then called recreation. Rugby, football, and hiking were the most common in that day. Third point to consider. Their shirts, hats, belts, letters, groceries, books, and even their eyeballs were collected by rather ordinary Catholics. The rope that bound St. Edmund Campion was saved by a man named Henry Walpole. Now, Walpole was a lukewarm Christian who turned away from his faith. He had gotten a front seat in Tyburn at the execution of St. Edmund Campion. He witnessed the final grace, bravery, and kindness of Campion, who also forgave his accusers and his execution. During the execution, a very small amount of blood splashed on Walpole's jacket. His attention was riveted by this. Suddenly, religion and questions of personal loyalty, fidelity, and faith had new meaning. Walpole converted, went to France, was ordained a priest, returned to England, where he too was captured and executed a decade later. Campion's robe came into the possession of Robert Parsons, a Jesuit who had known him. Parsons would wear that robe around his neck for the rest of his life as a reminder of the price that some must pay to defend the faith. Parsons himself was not martyred, but he spent his entire life dedicating to running a little school in France which would train English Catholics and send them as underground missionaries back to their homeland, where, in truth, most would ultimately be captured and die in brutal conditions by grisly methods. A martyr is an old Greek word that simply means witness. We think of martyrs as these dramatic figures, drawn and quartered for the faith. We say their mementos. We celebrate their feasts. Even if these martyrs came from a common background, we somehow get it into our heads that we are never the stuff of martyrs. But every single Christian must be a witness to his or her faith. To be publicly recognized may be extraordinary, but it is quite ordinary and quite essential that we all prepare ourselves to give witness to the faith in our daily lives. The English martyrs all loved their country, though their country had turned down a dangerous path. And there is a lesson for us too. There is a storm coming, graduates. Make no mistake. There's a storm spreading over our land. Once again, we see a government that is beginning to forbid people of faith to live according to their faith. In particular, it is increasingly hostile to Catholics who wish to live as Catholics. Once again, we see laws that penalize Catholics in health care and in other parts of civic and political life. We see wealthy individuals and private companies funding educational programs that will remake public and private education in the United States as a vehicle for the culture of death. And just as in the period of Edward Oldcorn, we are seeing Catholic leaders themselves opening the doors to these equals. I pray that we will soon see Catholic champions leading their countrymen back to sanity and even holiness of life. Now let me move to the last portion of the speech, since you probably all feel like martyrs sitting in these wooden chairs for so long. Let me remind you of the name of your school. The full name is a good and strong name, the Tyburn Academy Graduation. Maybe you sometimes have in mind the notion of a prayer card with a very feminine image of Our Lady. Such cards, of course, have their place. Perhaps St. Mary seems to you like a fairy princess in an old tale, magic